Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan, joined by Pete. We are bouncing off the walls with excitement. Pete, tell us why.
Today we are talking about James Gunn's final film in the MCU, most likely anyway, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
The swan song for Gunn, right?
Absolutely. In more ways than one. Absolutely.
More ways than one. So, as we always do, before we dive into it, and I think you and I both have approximately 1 billion words each on commentary, let's set the scene because it just opened for both of us on Thursday nights. You saw it on a Friday. I saw it on a Friday. Walk me through, how was the buzz when you went?
Absolutely. So I am yet once again continuing on my travels. I am in a third location in India.
The world tour.
At least on a local India tour. So I went to see this movie in Darjeeling, which is, I think most people will know it for the tea. It's famous for that.
Indeed.
And I sat down in the cinema and I remember messaging you immediately saying, I've forgotten how nice it is. The cinematic experience in the East is so wildly different than what we get in Europe and in North America.
It's so counterintuitive what I bet a lot of our American or British friends would think, right?
Absolutely. So first of all, let's talk about it right off the bat. Cost, it's next to nothing. I paid £3.50 for the most premium seat, which was like this plush leather recliner that went 180 degrees. Like I could have taken a nap there if I wanted to.
What's the food like? Normal popcorn, Snickers, Twix?
No, not at all. Because yes, you can get normal popcorn, normal candy if you'd like. But this is India. So you're getting like dumplings. You can get like steamed corn. You can get like chicken lollipops. No shortage of food variety. And the best thing is you order it, you pay for it, you sit down, and in the middle of the seat, like a genie in a bottle, someone will just magically appear with the food steaming hot and serve it to you.
It is so counterintuitive how the cinema experience in the US is some stale chips with cheese disguised as nachos. Take it and enjoy the movie. In so many other parts of the world, the food is just so varied and delicious, right?
And, we have talked about this in the past, but the best thing about the movie?
Intermission.
An hour and a half into this movie, because this movie is 2.5 hours long, but generally speaking, anywhere between an hour and 15 to an hour and a half into any movie, they stop the movie. Like the screen fades to black, the audio stops, and everyone, if you've never experienced it, you might think, oh, something must have happened.
You think that there's a glitch.
There's a glitch, or maybe, we have to leave the cinema for some reason.
If you're in America, you think there's a shooting.
Maybe. And this is when they start playing advertisements on the screen. So like there's no pre-roll ads. There's no trailers, nothing. You go into the movie. The movie started at 12:10. I sat down at the cinema and it started at 12:10, which is a shocker.
Yeah.
In this time, people got up, they went to the bathroom, people came in selling snacks. Again, more hot snacks
chicken
if
lollipops.
you wanted.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but I actually think it is the premium way to watch a movie. I have no qualms about taking a 10-minute break in the middle of a 3-hour movie so that I can go to the bathroom, I can stretch my legs. This is the stuff that I would do at home anyways.
Yeah, I agree.
So you kind of get the best of both worlds.
I've always argued that apart from just being a courtesy to give people an opportunity for the bathroom, it's a moneymaker because everybody is re-upping their popcorn, their snacks. It just doesn't make sense why you would not give people another opportunity to buy more stuff.
Absolutely. And let's put things in perspective. I paid 360 rupees, which is around £3.50 for the ticket. And I think including intermission, additional purchase of snacks, I spent twice that on food in the cinema.
The full spread.
Exactly. So I think it's a no-brainer for the cinema because if I spent 350 rupees on the tickets, I probably spent another 500 rupees on snacks, which in the grand scheme isn't a lot. But again, that's more than the price of the ticket.
Stop making me hungry and let's go to...
Oh, right.
This is a different environment. So, like, is there a lot of enthusiasm for Guardians of the Galaxy? Like, was it blockbuster style?
Unbelievable. I have to say I am so impressed because the cinema wasn't very full, but the people who were there were all enthusiasts. And this is maybe a credit to not just Hollywood, but specifically Disney and Marvel.
Yeah.
People were hooting and hollering.
Whoa.
In the middle of the movie. I haven't seen that since Endgame. I haven't seen that since Infinity War.
Yeah.
We'll get to it, but there was that infamous hallway fight scene in the third act. People were cheering. And then when Rocket says, "No, my name is Rocket Raccoon," people lost their goddamn minds. It was awesome. And this... Again, you wouldn't expect this level of enthusiasm, and maybe this is like the old school bias in my mind. This is India, this isn't the US. Will they get the humor or not?
Right.
Everyone was laughing when it was appropriate to be laughing. Yeah. Everyone was hooting and hollering. So the atmosphere actually, I think, was the best atmosphere I've seen in not just a Marvel movie, but in the cinema period ever. Outside of those tentpole summer blockbusters like Endgame or Infinity War. Yeah. And which was 3 years ago, 4 years ago now? Fantastic. My cinema experience was second to none. And I highly recommend that if our listeners are in this region, this is the best way to watch movies. Even if it's a movie that ultimately might be a wait for streaming. Yeah. I would still argue the cinematic experience is so fun for the intangibles that this is probably the best place to watch it.
Oh, that's great to hear.
How about you? How was Dubai?
So Dubai, it opened on a Thursday night, which I thought was a little bit unusual. Usually they're opening on a Wednesday night, but this time it was on a Thursday night. I did not go opening night. I went Friday night. So I hit peak mall traffic footfall weekend. And I went to a late showing. I went to an 11 o'clock. There was a good turnout, but I didn't feel like it was jammed in the sense that people were, waiting breathlessly for this movie. I felt like it was a known movie on a Friday night. So of course it was going to get a lot of ticket sales. It was roughly what I expected. It was kind of what you'd expect for an opening weekend of a MCU film. No interaction at all, contrary to what you experienced. Right. There was, of course, some laughter, but there was no rooting or hooting or hollering or stuff like that. But it was definitely an engaged audience. And then, of course, everyone stays around for the mid-credit and the end credit sequences. I think everyone was roundly disappointed by those two, including me. We'll get to that. Yeah. Overall, should we dive into it with grades or what you thought of it?
Let's start with grades. What did you call this movie?
I think it's a must-see in cinema, although...
Begrudgingly,
because it is the last installment of Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think that franchise has really been known to have a lot of strong emotional connections among the characters and among the audience. And this is the James Gunn swan song. And I think that the way that it ended, it was nice to see that in a cinema because it gave a little bit of finality and closure, to that franchise, presumably. In terms of the movie, it's now an action movie, I can say. The CGI has improved dramatically. And it was definitely worth it for the visuals, for the sound, for the overall experience. But if you did not see it at the cinema, I wouldn't say that you've missed out on an incredible opportunity. I think it's just important because of the positioning of this being kind of the third and final film.
Okay.
So that's my grade. I mean, tell me about yourself.
I thought this was a strong must subscribe. I'm trying very hard to look at this movie in a vacuum. I think that especially if you start comparing it to the other Phase 5 cinematic experiences, this is by and far a mile ahead of everyone else, right? I mean,
way ahead of Ant-Man.
talk about Ant-Man, talk
And
about
Thor.
anything else. This is,
Yeah.
even if you forget about Phase 5 and go into Phase 4, I think this is the
Yeah.
strongest movie that we've seen since
Yeah.
basically Endgame. So for me, if you're looking at it as a comparison of the recent works, this is, definitely an A+. This is a must watch in cinemas.
Yeah.
And even if you look at it on its own, I still found this to be a must watch in cinema. Primarily also for the same reasons you say. It is,
Yeah.
of course, James Gunn's last movie, at least in the Guardians universe, and most certainly in the MCU. I very much doubt he would come back for a fourth one or for any other MCU project, only because it probably doesn't do DC any favors, or it doesn't look good for their president to be directing a competitor's movie. So that's that. I think that if you look at this as the third movie in the arc of the Guardians of the Galaxy, there is significant character growth for most of the Guardians. I don't think that's the case for Gamora, but I think in general, this is a nice end cap for everyone, and even Gamora to a certain extent, to a very limited extent. But we'll touch on that. The action, I thought, James Gunn, I wouldn't necessarily think that he's one of the best action directors. I still think that's probably, in the MCU, that's still probably the Russo brothers. Having said that, the action sequences here were pretty, not just fun, but pretty strong. Like, so much so that I was amazed that this was a James Gunn action sequence.
I think that hallway fight scene, or the airlock fight scene that you referred to, I have to say, that was a super cool scene in the way that it was filmed, in the confined space. I really love that scene. I think that was kind of the bellwether. Yeah.
It was a brilliant 1 minute showcase of everyone's powers and abilities.
Yeah.
Gamora probably comes off a little bit the weakest out of all of them in terms of how kick-ass she is, but you can't fault the team as a whole. I mean, they cut through that hallway like a hot knife through butter, and they look dead sexy doing it. So I was very pleased with that.
I divide this film into kind of two things. One is the emotional aspect.
Yeah.
Because this is clearly a goodbye, right?
Yes.
And it is a goodbye in the sense that it highlights the best characteristics of almost every member, right? Perhaps Gamora aside, but almost everyone else gets a little bit of sunshine sprinkled on them so that they kind of go off into the sunset in the best possible light. That being said, is the story itself really a good story in this movie? I felt like the story was a little bit lacking. The events were good, but the overall story I felt was, and I'll walk through it. Let's give the obligatory spoiler alert. We start and we see Peter Quill, Star-Lord, has an alcohol problem, right? Very depressed. He's drinking. They're kind of getting their base on Nowhere back up to speed, hanging the sign. Everyone is happy and so forth, right? And then out of nowhere, I felt, Adam Warlock came. Did I miss something? Or did he just come really out of nowhere?
So, first of all, I love the pun because they're in nowhere. So, well done. So Adam Warlock was teased in, and I think this is a great point that you've raised, which I've written down as well, is that before watching this movie, I highly recommend our listeners watch Guardians of the Galaxy 2 first.
Okay.
And even though I didn't particularly like it, I think it's important to also watch the holiday special that they released last Christmas. Yeah. Because Adam Warlock was teased at the very end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I mean, that's a big ask for a casual MCU viewer. Requiring them to watch a movie in advance is already a big ask, but to make them sit through the credits to watch an end credit teaser to really understand where this character comes from, not even who he is really, but just where he comes from, that's asking probably a bit too much.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 came out in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Volume 2 came out in 2017. That's 6 years ago.
Yeah.
That's a mighty long time. Yes, we've seen them in Endgame 1 and 2. We've seen them in Thor. We've seen them in other places. But 2 came out 6 years ago. That's a really long time to kind of keep up. 3 years, okay, it's still a little bit by these standards fresh, but 6 years is a long time since your last film.
Yeah, 2 of those years you can probably blame on the pandemic, but
Yeah.
still, you're not wrong. At the end of the day, it is still 6 years, regardless of the circumstances surrounding it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very valid point, especially because Adam Warlock also is probably not that well known, right? Everyone knows Spider-Man. Even if you've not read the comic books, you have a passing awareness of the X-Men, of Spider-Man, of Thor and Captain America, sure. But Adam Warlock, I mean, you're starting to get into niche territories, right? And this is where I think James Gunn is going to have a lot of, maybe not problems, but like he's going to have to fight this urge in the DC universe. Because what he tends to do is go for characters that are very obscure.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely fine when you're in the 5th phase of a 32 plus long cinematic history.
That's right.
When you're talking about the first 5 movies in a universe, this is why I had a problem with some of the movies that James Gunn had selected to be as a part of the DC slate.
You gotta spoon feed it to folks.
Start off with the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And then, after 10 successful movies, that's when you start getting a little bit weird, as it were.
Yeah.
To their credit, that's what Kevin Feige did with Marvel. He didn't let anyone get weird until well into the 2nd or 3rd phase.
Yeah. I recognized Adam Warlock, but maybe I'm misremembering this, but I don't believe that there was anything that led up to his attack. I felt that attack came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Am I forgetting a scene that came earlier in the movie? I don't think I am, right?
No. So it came up because at the end of Guardians 2, they basically created Adam to defeat the Guardians.
Right.
The whole point was we now learn the High Evolutionary was behind that. But his mother, they got slighted or jilted because Rocket stole those batteries in the second movie. Right. And so she wanted to get revenge, and that was the purpose of having Adam there.
So I thought that came a little bit fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then he reminded me a little bit of Vision, with the jewel on his forehead.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was incredibly powerful and strong. Like he took one-on-one every Avenger. And I'm always a little bit skeptical when someone exerts so much power. But then, of course, he was kind of fought off and left.
Yeah, so I think what was very good was that initial fight scene was very good about showcasing his powerful abilities, but also that he was half-baked, as it were, and still not invulnerable.
Right.
The fact that he could get stabbed by Nebula and it could have been a mortal blow was a shock to him as well. When you mentioned the similarity to Vision, so funnily enough, in the comics, Adam Warlock's powers are derived from the Soul Stone, which is embedded in his head.
Oh.
In this universe, they obviously did away with that because they used the Mind Stone for Vision.
Right. So I thought that started a little bit fast, but I like the idea that there's kind of like a new villain, and maybe one of the things I do like about this story is that it didn't really try to, I liked it and didn't like it. It didn't try to interweave with the greater MCU too much, right? I was a little bit surprised there was no Thor. I was a little bit surprised like there wasn't like a Captain Marvel. I was a little bit surprised that there wasn't, one or two other cameos, like maybe a Spider-Man or someone, a Doctor Strange or someone. I was expecting that there was going to be, because MCU is really good at this, right? Using like Ant-Man, for example. Ant-Man wasn't really about Ant-Man. It was all about Kang the Conqueror. That film, I think, and one of the fundamental problems we had with it wasn't an Ant-Man film. It was a film made to introduce Kang to the MCU. Now that plan is all shot to hell, but nevertheless.
Yeah. So I think that was actually, for me, the strongest part of this movie was that it was a standalone movie. It wasn't built as part of an equation or as a part of a formula that added to the MCU math. So it gave it the freedom. I mean, even the mid-credits and the end-credit sequence had nothing to do with it.
Nope.
I actually noted that I sneakingly suspect they filmed something with Kang or an allusion to Kang as one of the mid-credit or end-credit sequences.
Yeah.
But maybe they scrapped it because of what's been going on with Jonathan Majors.
Yeah. I think that's right, because that's very un-MCU.
Absolutely.
Is not do any kind of cross promotion. I think they pulled it off pretty well, but I would not have minded, a clever cameo by someone.
Yeah, but I think the word clever is, you're leaning heavy into that, right? Like, because the problem I've had lately is that they've been very ham-fisted about how they introduce other characters into the universe, or not characters, but how they introduce other aspects of the MCU into these movies. That was my major concern, but I'm glad. I'm also relieved that this is, you can watch future movies without having to watch this necessarily. Yet this adds nothing to that math of, well, how did we get here with Kang? I need to watch Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Yeah. No, you don't. So that's fine.
So instead of Kang, we had the High Evolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
How familiar were you with him and his backstory before this movie?
As a villain, very, very little. Not much. Okay. I mean, I know of some of these characters, not all of them.
Yeah.
Of course, as an actor, we last saw him in Peacemaker, which is, again, a very James Gunnsian thing to do. Is, he had his wife in here. He's got other actors that he's worked with in the past in here, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. All directors do so, from Scorsese to Wes Anderson. Everyone has their favorite actors to work with. So why should it be any different for Gunn? I have no, some people are using that as a criticism. I was like, it doesn't matter. As long as they don't take away from the movie, who cares who's playing the role?
Is it coincidence that he's kind of all purpley and capey, which makes me think a lot about Kang?
Yeah, maybe. I think coincidence. Also, by the way, in terms of, let's talk about him. In terms of the High Evolutionary, what did you think of him as a bad guy?
I mean, I have to say the entire storyline was not, it's a little bit off-putting. I mean, the entire thing is basically he wants this perfect society. Mm-hmm. And I feel like he's already got Aisha. So I feel like they're already the perfect society. And then I don't understand why we needed all of this animal torture. It just felt really not like I was offended because of my love of animals. I mean, of course I love animals. I have a dog, but it was just kind of this is really what it's going to focus on. I the friendship was very sincere between those four animals, but the whole thing, which was centered around, basically animal torture and experimentation, I thought was just a little bit unnecessary.
Yeah.
And that was really a big theme within the whole movie, right? So I kind of liked the High Evolutionary. I liked the idea of Counter-Earth. I liked, he's kind of the opposite of what we've seen with Thanos, right? He's trying to build something, create a perfect society. But I just thought the way that he was doing it, I just really didn't get into all of the experimentation and the torture and stuff. I thought it was really not off-putting, but it wasn't entertaining for me. I wasn't enjoying it. If they would have minimized that, it would have been better. And then they kind of doubled up on it, because at the end, when the spaceship took off from Counter-Earth, and first of all, to be honest, all the folks there, or call them folks, but the animals were all kind of nasty looking, So, I mean, it just felt a little bit, Elizabeth Debicki and, Adam Warlock, they're very beautiful gold creatures, which seems like it's what he'd want to create, right? But instead he had all these kind of weird pigs and bats and stuff. I just thought it was strange. But then when the spaceship took off, then you found in the cargo hold, it turned into smuggling of children, right? Where they've got kind of all these blonde, Asian-looking kids, some of whom kind of had like scars on their faces or something. I thought the whole thing was just like, well, why are we going down this path at all?
Yeah, I agree. So that is one of the special notes that I think I've put aside, is that for our listeners, I think you should be warned. They alluded to it in the trailer, but it goes... I don't think it goes like very, very crazy into it, but there certainly is a lot of animal cruelty and animal torture in this show. And I think that if you're sensitive to that, I would be very careful, especially if you're going to go see this movie with children. Even if you're not talking about animal cruelty or torture, ultimately you see, the biggest expectation subversion I had was I thought one of the Guardians was going to die. That didn't happen, but instead the three amigos do, which was a little sad, right? I didn't expect T, Floor, and Lila to be dead. I thought there would be some kind of emotional reunion, and I thought that was going to be the impetus for Rocket to leave the Guardians.
Yeah.
That was my gut told me that
Yeah.
either someone was going to die and then the band was going to get broken up, or the band was going to get broken up because of something for external reasons. That definitely happens, but not in the way that I thought it would.
You don't actually see animal torture, but the implication is there. I mean, you see like the animals like without legs, or they've got like prosthetic arms and legs. I mean, that's pretty gory thought, which is they're obviously like...
It's a bit Saw, it's a bit horror movie-ish. Like, it's very dark for what are otherwise very cute animals, right? Like, that was a bunny and an otter.
Yeah.
And in general, the film was, I mean, in some of its emotional aspects, quite dark. And also, like, you remember in Superman where Superman kisses Lois Lane with her amnesia kiss and she forgets everything?
Yeah.
In the movie, you were just like, oh, that's kind of cool. But then when you sit down and actually think about it, you're kind of like, oh, that's a little gross that he can do that.
Yeah.
Because theoretically, what's to stop him from taking full advantage of anybody?
Yeah. I agree. The rape kiss.
And we see that here kind of because like Mantis basically calls Drax a dumb guy to his face, makes him feel really bad about it, but then just touches him on the forehead and says forget, and then it's like it never happened. And morally it's a bit questionable to do that kind of stuff, right? It just and I don't know. Again, I'm sure that's not what the intention is, but these are the kinds of things that in hindsight, you think about as being a little off-putting.
I thought, apart from this fight scene in the hallway or the airlock, my favorite scene, for sure, was when they were at Orgosphere.
100%. The biomechanical space station.
I thought that was everything about that I thought was super cool. I thought the artwork, I thought the design, I thought
everything.
That was a super... I didn't like their spacesuits, I have to say. I felt like those were made on a budget and they kind of looked like cheap Teletubbies. But
I like that. That was very Space 2001.
I didn't love... I like the scene where they couldn't get the color buttons to match the suits.
I thought that was hilarious.
It's intuitive. So I thought that was funny. But this leads to a question I think you and I are going to have. There is no chemistry at all between Star-Lord and Gamora. It's not a enjoyable theme. It could have been super funny where he could have been, hey, I got you roses. That's your favorite flower. And she's like, no, I like lilies. There could have been a lot of funny ways to play off this relationship. But she was just like, I'm a different person. Don't love you. And it was not funny, and I didn't feel any connection there.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because if you look at it, there was definite chemistry between the two of them in the first two movies, and in this one, it's almost as if they made a concerted effort not to have chemistry.
Yeah.
And the whole point about chemistry is that even if you're not trying, people can feel like there's something in the air between the two of you.
Yep.
And in this case, I think they made her be like this gruff, almost like jerk on purpose so that they could just kind of be like, there's definitely no chemistry. I wasn't 100% a fan of this.
Yeah.
I also think that they did this for a practical reason. I wonder if this weren't James Gunn's final movie, for example, I wonder what they would have done is perhaps made a fourth movie, which was about Rocket Raccoons and his backstory.
Yeah.
Whereas the third movie would have been the quest to find Gamora and make Gamora one of them again. I think that would have been better served because I agree with you. This idea of trying to win her over as a B plot didn't work for me, and also is such an important aspect considering the fact that he's basically depressed, he's become an alcoholic, etc. I would have thought that it would have been way better to make that an entire film.
I mean, in this movie, I would have preferred the flip side, which is she's a different Gamora. What if she's like very clingy? You know, what if she's like, wow, I'm so attracted to you all immediately, and she becomes like super clingy, and he's like, whoa, come on, like we're not like that. We've got this type of vibe, you know, like or there was just so many other ways to play it, but I felt like it was just a little bit boring.
Especially because she's the one who was kind of pining for having a family.
Yeah.
And I guess in this movie, that final end cap sequence when she's being accepted by Sylvester Stallone and the Ravagers.
Yeah, that's her family now.
I guess that's her family. I get it. But the whole point was in Guardians 1, in Guardians 2, she learns to accept the Guardians as her family. So I just found that a little bit counterintuitive that even though she is a different person, she would naturally gravitate to somebody else. I mean, this is the same Gamora from 10 years ago in the universe. Why would that change? Why would that path change is my question.
I agree. It wasn't funny, and I mean, they were a nice couple, right? If you're a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, you enjoyed them as a couple. I think I would have been, as an audience member, I would have been more satisfied had they been together. And I think there's a lot of funny things that they could have done, you know, where she's
I don't
not
like this now. I don't like that now.
He's like, I got you your favorite. And she's like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I did it like this, you know, like you go left, I go right. It's our thing. And like, they both went left. And there could have been so many like funny, awkward things that were like recurring, you know?
Where they're relearning each other.
Right.
And I think that would have been absolutely fine. If you definitely have to meld these two storylines into one movie, which again, I strongly suspect should have been done over two, fine. Right. I agree with you. I just think that it's a little bit of a kick in the teeth for fans of these couples, because that last scene when they're at the dock and she's leaving and they're not even facing each other and they have that moment together, that felt genuine to me. I was like, oh man. And she, you know, where even she admits like, I bet we were great together. Well, I mean, damn it, you know, like that's not how you kick off the end of the movie. That's not how you end it. Like that would have been great if that's how you kicked off the beginning of the second act or the third act and let that accelerate over the course of that one act. Because again, there are a lot of parallels in this movie that we saw in the first one. So for example, you see Rocket standing on Groot's shoulders in that hallway scene fighting. Yep. And then even before that, you see Groot and Star-Lord going back to back and firing at everybody else. That was exactly like the prison sequence in the first movie.
That's right.
And then at the very end, when you see Peter go through space on his own to jump into the other ship, and this time he doesn't make it. In the first movie, we see him do that to save Gamora. Right? So there's a lot of parallel scenes and a lot of moments which make me think, oh my God, that almost happened exactly like that in Guardians 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. So if you're already ready to make these kind of parallels to the first movie, how hard would it have been, even if you don't want them together fully, but at least open the door to them being together? How great would it have been if in this time it was Peter that gets saved by Gamora in space and they both freeze and then Warlock brings them in. Yeah. And then they both realize, okay, there clearly is something here. We should try to figure it out together. And then, of course, the post-credit stinger could have been both of them are on Earth trying to figure each other out. rather than him with his granddad.
Yeah, he could have taken her to Earth and been like, "Hey, like, where have you been? So great to see you." Well, funny story. Here's my
Because he
girlfriend.
raises a great point. He is a Ravager, right? He was
That's
raised
right.
by Yondu as a Ravager. She never
right.
really was. So for
Correct.
her to accept them as her family all of a sudden, and of course, I get that this is a couple years after the blip or whatever you want to call it. So I get that there's a lot of things that have changed, but, you know, it, I think, could have been handled in a more emotionally satisfying way for the fans. And of course, that doesn't mean that every relationship has to work out, and that's absolutely fine too. That's also a mature way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I think we agree that the action was exceptional. Probably the best that we've seen from Guardians. Was it fun? Did you enjoy it?
I did. I thought there were a couple of moments that made me laugh. I thought
Yeah.
that scene where he's trying to teach Nebula how to open the car door and then he finally loses his cool.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Even when they're in that house and Drax wants to keep like lying down on the sofa,
down on the
right?
couch. Exactly. Right.
He's like, but this is what it's for.
Yeah. It feels counterintuitive that it wouldn't have multi-uses, right?
Yeah.
So I liked that kind of stuff. Though that was, for me, classic James Gunn humor.
Yeah.
Very
that's
lighthearted.
what Guardians is at its best, right?
Totally. And I think that, to take it one step further, I actually think that's also when the MCU is at its best.
Yeah.
When in moments of dire stress, they're still taking moments to make a lighthearted quip to remind everyone that, hey, look, don't take this too seriously.
Exactly.
So I liked that. I thought everyone really had a good character arc. Over 3 movies, we've kind of seen Peter grow, especially after the second movie, but a little bit more in the third movie. Nebula coming into her own like 110% in this movie, right? Where she's accepted that position of being a leader, and where Mantis thinks that she's a jerk, but then realizes it's because she's carrying the weight of all the stress in the world on her shoulders. And when she breaks down crying after Rocket was okay, I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was really good. I think we got to see most of Rocket's arc in the last movie, but we see a little bit more of it here. Groot, I mean, for all of his Grootness, was the same. He's never really had an emotional arc per se, but it was nice that he was finally able to say something beyond "I am Groot."
Yeah.
Things like that kind of lent itself to the finality of this movie.
Yeah.
Which is why it was a bit of a shocker for that end cap title card to say Star-Lord will return and not the Guardians will return.
Yeah, I saw that as well. I mean, can we talk about the mid-credit? So the mid-credit, was there anything to really take from that?
Not particularly.
Yeah. I mean, it just kind of showed that...
It just highlights the new Guardians team if they ever decide to make a 4th movie.
Right.
You've got another Guardians team.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, in case you didn't know it, that little girl who we saw running on the circular treadmill, she, in the comics, is the daughter of the original Marvel, Captain Marvel, the first Captain Marvel.
Did not know that.
Yeah, it's a very deep cut. I didn't know that. I had to research that because I knew that they wouldn't just throw her in there as a random person. So I looked it up and I found out that's who she is. So again, it's just a little bit of that's a classic James Gunn deep cut, but not a deep cut that affects the universe.
Right.
So I liked that. What did you think of the end credit though?
So I didn't understand it. Except for the card, what did you make of the breakfast like scene when he's talking to his grandfather while eating cereal? What did you make of that? Is there anything to take from that?
Nothing. They had a nice little Easter egg because the headline of the newspaper was about Kevin Bacon being abducted by aliens.
Right.
But that's it.
Then they put the card at the end, but I felt like the card was just that thing to kind of like give them optionality and to seed like speculation. I didn't really read anything into it. I just felt like it was intentionally meant to like, keep the door open and drive speculation.
So Dave Bautista has very publicly said he doesn't want to come back.
Yeah, I've heard.
He's very publicly shit on this role. He doesn't like it.
Why? Because of the makeup?
I think that he thinks that it's a one-dimensional character. I also think that this is the problem I have with actors like Dave Bautista. He's very good, first of all, right? Like we've seen him do some very niche and some good roles. But I think that you're in a very privileged and entitled position.
Yeah.
And I think that if you see yourself as a quote unquote artiste with an E,
Yeah.
and not as an actor, then that's where you start getting problems. And I'm not saying that's what he thinks, but that's certainly what it sounded like when he said, well, this role offered me nothing. It didn't do anything for me, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know what it did do for you is it put you on the map for
It
every
made you an
human
actor.
being on the earth.
Yeah.
With all due respect to Dave Bautista, who is, by the way, and I will affirm this to anyone, an excellent actor. He's not just a quote-unquote wrestler turned actor, which a lot of people throw that about as an insult. That's not him. He is a good actor, period. But don't forget that before this, you kind of weren't well known at all. Right? And I think before this role, you were just a wrestler turned actor. I think this movie is the one that gave you the platform to say, hey, I can do other things. Throw me a bone. Somebody threw him a bone, and he proved it. So I think it's a little disingenuous, and I think it's also a little insulting for an actor to then turn around and kind of shit on the franchise instead of be thankful to it.
I totally agree. I think there's nothing more frustrating to an entertainment fan than the actor behind a beloved character. We can also put Han Solo in this, right?
Yeah.
Where the actor doesn't totally appreciate what they've created. They think, oh, it's limiting me. It's stifling me.
I just
can be
did this
so
for
much
a
more.
paycheck. And he's kind of like, yeah, but your fans didn't watch this and love you for it because it was a paycheck for you. They loved it for you. And if you want to look at the other end of the spectrum, then you have actors like Nicolas Cage or like Tom Hanks, who very fondly look back at the way they started, right? I mean, to this date, Tom Hanks says, hey, I loved Bosom Buddies. That's a show that made me famous. That's what I really liked. And this is the kind of stuff that I love doing. I still love comedy. He doesn't say, oh, well, you know, that was just a springboard until I could get my role on Forrest Gump in Philadelphia. He doesn't crap on that role. I find that a little disingenuous from Dave Bautista. So anyway, he's crapped on it. Zoe Saldana has as well. So I think she was unhappy with her roles or maybe her function in the thing. So she was kind of like, I'm ready to hang up my boots on this franchise. I think she's been maybe a little bit more politically savvy about it or diplomatic about it.
Yeah. She may have a little bit of a better argument as well. You know, I mean,
plus, this is another movie where she's shown off as like a green or blue person, another franchise. Like, for God's sakes, let us see Zoe Saldana for who she is, the actor and the beautiful woman that she is, right? So
I agree. There's not a whole lot. I mean, especially in this movie, to be honest, there's not a whole lot of depth to her role.
Absolutely.
It's really, there's not much.
There was a lot for her in the first movie. There was a lot for her in Infinity Wars, like when she's got that struggle with Thanos himself. I thought that was great.
There's nothing here for her.
But since then, emotionally kind of at rock bottom. So I can get that.
Yeah.
Karen Gillan hasn't said anything one way or another. Bradley Cooper hasn't really said anything one way or another. Vin Diesel, I mean, I love the guy. I'm sure he'd come back in the drop of a heartbeat, especially because he's just a voice. He's not like doing any of the character acting himself. I can see them bringing some of these characters back in individual roles. Chris Pratt's the only one who's openly said, I would love to come back if the role is right for me. I would gladly come back. Which is, I think, why they've made it the Incredible Star-Lord will come back.
Yeah. Is Star-Lord, I mean, in 2014, you know, we talked about like the Hollywood Chris's, right?
Yeah.
Hemsworth and Pine and Evans, right? I mean, Pratt was, I think, when Guardians came out, kind of like catapulted to the #1 Chris. And then his star kind of dipped a little bit. You know, was this a showcase for him? I also felt like he was portrayed okay, especially in the fight scenes and in a heroic role, but I don't think it was the best platform that he's had for his humor or for, you know, any emotional depth.
That was movie number 1 and 2 for him.
Yeah.
I think 1 and 2, like as a whole, the good thing about this movie is that it's a good team movie. So it's about a little bit for everybody else.
Yeah.
I think his emotional end cap really came in the second film when he's confronting his father.
Yeah.
Right? Or and not just that, but when he's accepting that Yondu is his real dad, as it were.
Yeah. I guess when I left the cinema I mean, I definitely felt like I was happy that I went to the movie, and I felt like there was some good closure, but I didn't feel like they really hit their potential on this Guardians film. But having watched Ant-Man, where I thought they just like squandered everything, I thought this was dramatically a much better movie than Ant-Man, and I was really pleased about that.
Yeah.
But I have to say, for a Guardians film, I felt like they could have increased the juice, the humor, the something, like another couple notches.
Yeah, maybe. In that respect, I actually give a lot of kudos because James Gunn, I think, also, like Taika Waititi and like some of the other MCU films, has tended to add jokes or humors in places where you don't need them.
Yeah.
And it has the potential to undercut emotional scenes. Taika Waititi, most famously in Ragnarok, did that at the very end. Like, he didn't need that joke as Asgard was blown up to bits. He didn't need that as a joke. For me, it took away from that emotional depth and that heaviness from that moment. I was actually quite upset about that. I like that he refrained from taking away from anything like that. You know, like this very deep emotional moment with Rocket in the afterlife. If they had sprinkled some kind of stupid joke with Teefs or Floor, like, it would have been really annoying to see.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think that restraint was good. And I preferred that he'd err on the side of heavy-handed restraint than heavy-handed humor.
You're right.
Again, overall, I think this movie, especially if you're comparing it to other MCU movies as of late, is definitely a must-watch in cinemas. Regardless of that, I think this is definitely a must-watch in cinemas. The soundtrack, which we didn't really talk about, was stellar.
Yep, soundtrack was very good.
Very James Gunnian, right? You can expect a few things from James Gunn. You can expect a lot of color. You can expect some humor. You can expect some things that are a little dark. And you can expect a phenomenal soundtrack. And we got that in spades in this movie.
Yeah. They spend a lot of effort, I think, curating the songs. And they really match up with the scenes well also.
Better than anybody else, I think, in the MCU. I would suggest that even though I would agree with your assessment that some things could have been handled better, overall, I think that the ending felt earned for every character.
Yeah.
And the progression felt natural. And, you know, the character arcs felt right. Even if we don't think they ended the way they should have, or if they ended perfectly well. Like, I still think the Gamora thing was the weakest. But having said that, I still liked the overall arc between films 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's the way people have to look at this arc, is not just in this movie, but over a series of 3 films, plus any cameos they've made in other movies.
But do you think this is the last that we see the Guardians? Maybe together, but individually, I think we can assume we're going to see Nebula for sure, right?
I would hope we get to see Nebula because I have a massive thing for Karen Gillan. I think she's awesome.
Yeah.
I would hope that we see more of Rocket and his team as the Guardians, his new team of Guardians. And Star-Lord, I mean, look, Chris Pratt, he's fine. I like him. I think as Star-Lord, he's the exact right actor. And, you know, I think a lot of people give him a lot of crap for his personal life stuff, not for his professional life stuff. I don't think you should judge a character's role based on an actor's private life, whatever that is.
I think Pratt is a very unique leading man. You know, he's better when he's a little bit like the underdog,
Like
and
the
a little
everyman.
bit self-depreciating. You know, he's the contrast between him and Stark and even Thor is pretty high.
Yeah.
And I think that he's at his best when he's kind of playing off of them,
Yes.
trying to like impress Gamora and still be like, show like, hey, I'm manly and I'm tough and I can be a leader. Like, that's when he's at his best, when he's a little bit insecure, but still trying to, you know, maintain his alpha dog status.
That's what they could have done in that very, very brief, like 30-second fight scene between him and Adam Warlock, and Gamora was there.
Yeah.
I think he could have used that moment to show Gamora what an alpha he is, but he gets routinely destroyed by Adam Warlock.
Yeah.
And then he finally pulls off the smart move by programming the self-destruct in the ship.
Yeah.
I think that would have been better. Again, there are small missed opportunities. For example, I think this movie was 30 minutes too long. Rather than showing a lot of Rocket's backstory and some of that animal cruelty stuff, they would have been better served shifting that focus to the high evolutionary and as to why he wants to create the perfect society.
Yeah.
Because he is a very one-note villain as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, that ending battle was so anticlimactic. Like, he gets absolutely bodied by the Guardians in less than 30 seconds before he gets stabbed. After, all those force powers that he's showing, and I do call them force powers because that's what it looked like. After all of that, in the entire movie, all of a sudden he gets bodied by 5 guys, none of whom have superpowers. It kind of gets a bit weird.
I take your point, though. I really was expecting somehow Kang would be in here.
Yeah.
Because I just felt like the purpleness mostly, but like, how is Kang not involved at all? And I absolutely thought that he was going to have some aspects. So I feel like maybe there has been like some post editing where he was removed and therefore the storyline was like a little bit lumpy, where there's probably like an explanation in terms of, maybe he reported to Kang, or maybe they were in this together. Like,
maybe he's building this perfect society for Kang.
Yes, because there just wasn't a lot of backstory about him. Someone who's like quite significant as a villain, right?
But in any case, look, I think ultimately we're saying the same thing. Even with some of its faults, this is
much better from MCU. Having watched Thor and Ant-Man, which I think were so disappointing, this was at least something that MCU could, hold its head up on.
Yeah.
What do you think the box office numbers are going to look like? Have you seen anything so far?
Nothing yet. It's too early. I mean, we're recording this on a Saturday, noon Dubai time. So the Friday numbers probably haven't been reported in the US yet. It's too early.
What are your predictions? Where do we put this on our top 10?
I was just about to say, we both put it as number 2. So I'm hoping that it makes a lot of money, but not as much as The Flash. And you hope that it makes a lot of money, but not as much as Mission Impossible.
I still think maybe I would move it to number 3 and put The Flash ahead of it because The Flash looks so good. Maybe now, in retrospect, I would drop it to 3 and I'd put The Flash ahead of it. We still had the top. I think I had Flash at 3, right? So maybe I'd flip-flop those.
You had Flash at 4.
Oh. Maybe I'd flip-flop a little bit. I thought Guardians is going to make a lot of money, but it's not yet a summer time film, right? We're still in early May.
Yeah.
And that's going to knock it down a lot. And not a lot, I mean like several hundred million, right?
I think that I'm more than ever confident as to how successful this movie is going to be based on the reaction of the audience here in India. However, I'm starting to sweat about Fast X because Fast X has been on pre-sale in India for the last 2.5 months, I found out.
What?
Yeah. Apparently the franchise does incredibly well in India.
Well, if everyone's buying a ticket for only £3, it's got to sell a lot.
Well, you've got 1 billion people here. So I'm just saying you're right. I think that's the only thing that could possibly save my butt is the fact that tickets are so much cheaper here.
Yeah. I mean,
put things in perspective. Super Mario only made $2 million in all of India.
Really?
That's it.
Oh.
Right? And that's $1 billion movie.
Yeah, that's $1 billion movie.
It says something.
Okay. So that is our review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I think it's got all the stuff that you want from all the Quill, Cosmos. We didn't even mention how prominent Cosmos is here. Drax, Mantis, right? All the folks that we've come to love. Baby Groot, which is now super big.
Super buff.
Yeah, super buff. Please, based on the recommendations of Heat and myself, we do recommend that you go see this in the cinemas, take in the whole experience, cheer, enjoy your favorite characters on the big screen, because the way that it ended, we may not be seeing them again, and probably never, at least all together, right?
And listen, if not for the movie, which you definitely should, watch it to help make sure that Ethan and I are correct about the prediction of this being the second most popular movie this summer.
Yeah, think about someone other than yourselves. Think about myself.
In any case, if you agree with us, what did you think of this movie? What didn't you like about this movie? Do you think any of the other actors are coming back? Reach out to us, let us know. Like this video and leave a comment below. Tweet at us at F&S Podcast on Twitter. DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast. Or send us an old school email, aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com.
We appreciate everyone joining, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Films and Stuff Podcast. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.